Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. My 2-year-old niece was there with us during the stay, and that is the part that has always made the whole experience impossible for me to dismiss. She was fearless. Not normal toddler fearless either. She was the kind of child who seemed to have no sense that the world could hurt her. She would run toward things most children hesitated around. She was curious about everything. Bugs, dogs, water, mud, woods, strangers, noises in the dark. None of it bothered her. Honestly, if someone had opened the front door and let her loose, she probably would have happily waddled straight into the forest after a bear. She had that kind of energy. At the time, she was still learning how to talk. She could say words clearly enough, but most of her sentences were only 1 or 2 words long. Sometimes 3 if she was really trying to explain something. Usually, she got her point across by pointing, pulling someone toward what she wanted, or repeating the same word until an adult understood. She was not shy. She was not delicate. And I had never seen her truly afraid of anything before. That was why what happened during that stay stuck with me so deeply. We had been staying in this large house with family for several days. There were enough people around that the place was constantly busy. Adults moved between the kitchen and living room. Kids ran through the halls, played in bedrooms, and disappeared upstairs. There were bunk rooms, empty spaces, long hallways, and enough doors that it was easy for children to wander off and reappear somewhere else. Nothing about the house had seemed especially strange at first. It was just a place we were staying temporarily. The kind of place where people got settled in, picked rooms, unpacked bags, made food together, and tried to keep track of all the children. During the day, it was loud and crowded. At night, it became quieter, but there were still enough people around that nobody should have felt alone. About 3 or 4 days into the stay, I was helping in the kitchen while lunch was being prepared. There were probably several people moving around, talking over each other, opening cupboards, washing dishes, and trying to get food ready. My niece wandered in while I was busy. She was in a good mood, as usual. She was not crying or tired. She was just doing what toddlers do, appearing wherever food is being made. I gave her a snack and something to drink. She took them happily. Then I sent her back out into the hall to play. It could not have been more than a minute later when I heard her scream. I do not mean a normal toddler scream. It was not the kind of scream a child makes when they fall down, get startled, or want attention. It was not angry. It was not frustrated. It was pure terror. The sound ripped through the house. For 1 second, I did not even recognize it as her voice. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap. It was high, raw, and desperate. But underneath all of that, it was human. It was my niece. I dropped what I was doing and ran out of the kitchen. She was running toward me down the hallway. Her face was twisted in terror. Tears were pouring down her cheeks. She was moving as fast as her little legs could carry her, stumbling slightly as she ran. When she saw me, she threw herself at me so hard that I had to grab her quickly to keep her from falling. She climbed into my arms and screamed against my neck. She was shaking. not just upset, shaking all over. Her little hands clawed at my clothes and my neck like she was trying to pull me away with her. She kept trying to make me move, trying to make me run somewhere, even though she could barely get the words out. Then she screamed, "Run, baby, eyes, eyes, run." I remember feeling a cold wave move through me. At first, I thought she had seen something in the hallway. Maybe one of the older kids had scared her. Maybe something had fallen. Maybe she had gotten herself trapped near a door. I turned and looked in the direction she had come from. The hallway was empty. There were no windows along that stretch, no strange reflections, no one standing there, no toy making noise, nothing on the floor. There was only a long, blank hallway and a locked door at the far end. That was it. My niece was still screaming. She pointed down the hall with one shaking hand. Eyes. She cried again. Baby, eyes. I looked down the hallway harder. Nothing. The door at the end was shut and locked. The walls were bare. The lights were normal. No one came around the corner. No one opened a door. There was no sound coming from the other side of the locked door. But she would not stop staring at it. She kept burying her face against me, then pulling back and pointing again. Every time she looked down the hall, she panicked all over again. Her eyes were wide and fixed on something I could not see. By then, the screaming had brought everyone else out. Family members came from the kitchen, living room, and nearby rooms, all asking what happened. They saw her crying in my arms, shaking and clinging to me. They saw me standing in the hall, looking toward the locked door. But nobody could figure out what was wrong. Adults started asking her questions. Did you get hurt? Did someone scare you? Did you fall down? Is there something in the hallway? She could not explain. She was only 2, and terror had taken away even the little language she had. All she could manage was, baby, eyes, baby, then she would start crying again. Someone suggested maybe she had seen another child. Someone else thought perhaps she had wandered into a room and gotten startled by a person sleeping. Maybe she saw a shadow. Maybe she saw something moving under a blanket. Maybe an older cousin had made a face at her without realizing how badly it would scare her. Those explanations were reasonable. At least, they sounded reasonable to everyone else. But I was there. I had seen her come down that hall. I had seen where she was pointing. There had been no child there. There had been no one in the hallway at all. Eventually, we calmed her down enough to get her settled. It took a while. She stayed attached to me for most of the afternoon. She did not want to be put down. Every so often, she would glance toward the hallway and start whimpering again. I remember thinking that maybe she had simply frightened herself. Toddlers can react strongly to things adults barely notice. A shadow can look alive. A door can make a scary sound. A coat hanging in the wrong place can become a monster. I tried to tell myself that was what had happened. But there was something about the way she had set eyes. Not just once, over and over, like she had seen something looking at her. The next day, she seemed mostly normal again. She was back to running around, playing, laughing, and getting into things. She still avoided that stretch of hallway when she could, but toddlers change moods quickly. I started believing maybe the moment had passed. Maybe it had been one random scare that had become bigger because we all reacted to it. Then, it happened again. This time, I was holding her upstairs. I had picked her up because she was tired or wanted to be carried. We were near one of the common rooms upstairs, and there was a couch nearby. I remember starting to sit down with her in my arms. The moment I lowered myself toward the couch, she began screaming. It was the same scream, that terrible, panicked sound that did not match a child who had simply been startled. She pushed herself away from the couch, trying to climb out of my arms. Her entire body went stiff. She pointed toward the couch with one hand and cried, "Run." I stopped immediately. I did not sit down. I stood there holding her while she stared at the couch as if something was on it. But the couch was empty. There was nothing under the cushions that I could see. No toy, no bug, no person, no strange stain. Nothing. I tried to move closer, thinking perhaps she had seen something small on the floor or underneath the couch. That made her panic worse. She began crying so hard that she could barely breathe between screams. She pointed past the couch and toward the hallway. Then her finger moved. Slowly, as if she were following something with her eyes. Her hand tracked from the couch toward the hallway, then down the hall toward an empty bunk room. She did not point randomly. Her eyes were focused. She followed something that seemed to be moving away from us. "Baby," she screamed. Then, eyes. Then, "Run." Her fingers stayed aimed toward the bunk room. The door to it was open. Inside, the room was empty. There were beds, walls, shadows, and nothing else. I stood there holding her, staring toward the room, feeling my skin crawl. Again, other family members came running when they heard her. Again, they tried to explain it away. Maybe she had seen someone in the bunk room earlier. Maybe she was afraid of the couch for some reason. Maybe she was tired and overstimulated. Maybe she had seen her own reflection in something. But I had watched her finger follow something down the hallway. I had watched her track it all the way into that empty room. And there had been no one there. The third time was the worst. It happened later during the stay, when she was playing with her cousins. She had been running around with the other kids, laughing and being her usual fearless self. For a while, I had been relieved. She seemed happy. She was not clinging to anyone. She was not crying. She was not looking down the hall or refusing to go upstairs. Then I heard her scream my name. It was not just a scared call. It was desperate. She screamed for me again and again. I ran toward the sound. The other children were nearby, but she was not with them anymore. I followed the screaming down the hall toward the bunk room. That room. The same empty bunk room she had pointed toward before. When I got there, she was inside. She was alone. She was standing near one of the beds, completely inconsolable. She was crying so hard she could barely stand. Her face was wet with tears. Her hands were stretched out as if she had been reaching for someone or trying to push something away. When she saw me, she ran straight at me and clung to me with all the strength she had. She did not want to let go. She kept saying, "Ghost, baby." That was the first time she used those words clearly enough that everyone understood them. "Ghost, baby," she repeated through tears. Then she pointed somewhere in the room. I looked. Nothing. There was no child, no toy, no shadow that looked especially different from the rest. No one under the beds, no one in the closets, no movement near the walls. The room was empty. But she was terrified of something in it. After that, things changed. She began trying to leave the house. Not in a normal toddler way, where a child wants to go outside because they are bored or want to play. She seemed desperate to get out. Whenever a door opened, she would make a run for it. She would pull at handles. She would stand near exits and cry. She did not want to go near certain rooms, especially the hallway and the bunk room. By the end of the stay, the adults had to make sure the doors stayed locked so she would not wander or run outside. It was not because she was being naughty. She wanted out. She wanted away from the house. She could not explain it well, but her behavior made it obvious. She was afraid of something there, something that the rest of us could not see. Thankfully, the trip was close to ending by then. I do not know what would have happened if we had stayed longer. Maybe she would have eventually calmed down. Maybe she would have become used to the place. Maybe the fear would have disappeared after a few more days. Or maybe it would have gotten worse. Once we left, she slowly recovered. But for a long time afterward, nobody could mention what happened without upsetting her. The moment someone brought up the house, the hallway, the bunk room, or the ghost baby, she would fall apart again. She would cry. She would get scared. She would repeat the same words. Baby, eyes, ghost baby. The family learned not to mention it around her. It became one of those topics everyone avoided because it upset her too much. At first, people were worried. Then, over time, they began trying to make sense of it in a less frightening way. Eventually, the family settled on their own explanation. They said she must have seen one of her cousins sleeping upstairs. Maybe she saw a blanket moving and did not understand what she was seeing. Maybe the shape underneath the blanket looked strange to her. Maybe she thought a child was under there but did not recognize them. Maybe she got startled, and the fear grew bigger each time people talked about it. Now, years later, some family members treat it almost like a joke. They tell the story as if it was a funny example of a toddler being dramatic. They say she got scared by a cousin sleeping under a blanket. They laugh about the way she used to try to escape the house. They repeat ghost baby as though it was a cute little phrase she made up. But I was the only person who witnessed all three moments closely. I was holding her the second time. I saw her point at the couch. I saw her trace something through the hallway. I saw her follow it with her eyes until it reached the empty bunk room. The first time, I saw her run from an empty hallway, screaming about eyes. I looked down that hallway myself. There was no sleeping cousin. There was no moving blanket. There was no child at all. And the third time, I found her alone in the bunk room, terrified of something no one else could see. I do not know what it was. I cannot honestly claim it was a ghost. I cannot say there was really a dead child in that house. Maybe there was some explanation that none of us understood. Maybe she saw something ordinary and her young mind turned it into something horrifying. Maybe there were sounds, shadows, reflections, or things in the room that made sense to an adult but were terrifying to a 2-year-old. But I know it was not simply another child sleeping upstairs. That explanation does not fit what I saw. There was no child in the hallway. There was no one on the couch. There was no sleeping cousin in the bunk room. And the fear in her face was not pretend. She had never been scared of anything before. She was the kind of kid who would run toward danger without even realizing it was dangerous. But in that house, something had reduced her to screaming, shaking, trying to escape, and begging the adults around her to run. Baby, eyes, run. I still think about those words. Not because I know what they meant, but because I do not. And because every time she said them, she was looking at something that was not there. I am a little late telling this story, but it is still one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. Most people who hear it either think I am exaggerating or assume I only saw a large house cat, a dog, or some shadow in the snow. But I know what I saw. I stared straight into the eyes of a mountain lion from only a short distance away. At the time, I lived in a very small town in Montana. It was one of those places where the town itself felt safe and familiar, but the wilderness was never far away. You could drive a few minutes in one direction and be surrounded by houses, small businesses, and quiet roads. Drive a few minutes in another direction, and you would be in open land, thick woods, mountains, trails, and places where you knew wild animals were moving around whether you could see them or not. My family lived in an old house on a decent-sized piece of property. Behind and around the property were large cliffs and several hiking trails. The land felt huge when I was a kid. There were places to run, places to hide, trees to climb, piles of snow in winter, and enough room that adults could be outside talking while kids were somewhere else entirely. Behind our property was a chain-link fence. On the other side of that fence was forest, not a small patch of trees behind a neighborhood. Real forest. The kind that looked dark even in the daytime because the trees were packed close together. The ground beyond the fence was uneven and covered in brush, fallen branches, rocks, and snow during the winter. It led toward the cliffs and trails, and it was easy to forget how close the wild land really was when you were just a kid playing in your backyard. But the animals never forgot. We heard things outside at night all the time. Sometimes it was deer moving through the trees. Sometimes it was coyotes. Sometimes it was something heavier making its way through the brush. In Montana, you learn early that the woods are not empty just because you cannot see anything moving. Mountain lions were part of that reality. They were not something we saw every day, but they were around. Every so often, people would talk about one being spotted near a trail or near somebody's property. Sometimes there would be rumors about tracks in the snow. Sometimes a neighbor would say they heard something strange outside during the night. And mountain lions make sounds that can stay with you. They can scream in a way that does not sound like a normal animal. It is sharp, high, and almost human. When you hear it in the middle of the night, especially near the woods, it can sound like someone being hurt. It can sound like a woman screaming. It can sound like something you do not want to investigate. I had heard those sounds before outside my window. I even had recordings on my phone from different nights when the sounds were close enough to make everyone stop and listen. They were not the usual noises of dogs or coyotes. They were those harsh, ear-piercing shrieks that made the darkness outside feel much closer than it should have. So even though I was only 12 years old, I knew mountain lions existed around our property. I knew they were not animals you wanted to meet face to face. Every year, usually sometime in January or February, my family hosted a big gathering at our house. It was sort of a winter tradition. Friends and family would come over after the holidays, and everyone would bring their old Christmas trees to burn in a huge bonfire. The adults loved it. They would stand around the fire talking, drinking, laughing, and catching up with people they had not seen since Christmas. The old trees would burn fast and bright, throwing sparks into the cold winter air. The smell of pine smoke would cling to everyone's jackets and hair. There would be food inside, people coming in and out of the house. And the grown-ups would stay outside around the fire long after most kids started getting tired. For us kids, though, the adult bonfire was not that exciting. At first, it was fun to watch the trees burn. The flames were huge, and there was something exciting about seeing those old Christmas trees go up in a rush of orange fire. But after a while, the adults would start talking about boring things. Work, money, people we did not know. Things that did not matter to us at all. So we usually found something else to do. My dad had built a tree fort on the far corner of our property. It was not some tiny platform nailed to a tree. To us, it felt enormous. It had enough room for several kids to sit on top, and there was a slide coming down from it. It was far enough from the house and bonfire that we felt like we had our own private world out there. At night, especially in winter, it was a little spooky. The bonfire lit up part of the yard, but the tree fort was farther away, near the edge of the property. The light from the fire did not reach all the way over there. The snow reflected a little of the moonlight, but the forest beyond the chain-link fence was almost completely black. Still, we were kids. We did not think about danger much. We were just playing. That night, there were a few of us out at the tree fort. We had been climbing up, sliding down, laughing too loudly, and messing around the way kids do when they know adults are nearby, but not close enough to hear every word. It was around 9 at night. The air was cold enough that our breath came out in white clouds. Snow covered the ground beneath the fort, and every time someone went down the slide, they landed in a soft pile at the bottom. The adults were still gathered around the bonfire, but they seemed far away from where we were. We could see the glow of the fire in the distance. We could hear faint voices and laughter when the wind was right. But from up in the tree fort, it felt like we were alone. We were all on top of the fort, giggling and talking, when I heard something. Crunch. It came from below us. Not from the yard side, from the other side of the chain link fence. At first, I thought it was one of our friends messing around. Maybe someone had climbed down without us noticing. Maybe somebody had thrown a snowball. Maybe one of the dogs had gotten outside somehow. But the sound came again. Crunch, slow and heavy. The sound of something stepping into snow. I stopped laughing. I told everyone to be quiet. At first, they did not listen. Kids rarely do when they are having fun. Somebody asked what was wrong. Someone else probably made a joke. But I told them again, more seriously this time. Be quiet. The way I said it must have worked, because everyone stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing. No voices, no movement from the fort. No sound except the faint crackle of the bonfire in the distance and the cold wind moving through the trees. Then I heard another crunch. This one was closer. I slowly moved toward the edge of the fort and looked down. The chain link fence separated our property from the forest. On our side, the snow was open and smooth except for our tracks. On the other side, the ground dropped slightly into dark trees and brush. At first, I saw only a shape, a yellowish shadow moving beneath us. It was low to the ground, slipping through the darkness just beyond the fence. The snow reflected enough light that I could see it was not just a shadow from a tree. It was something alive. It moved carefully, slowly, quietly. For a second, my mind searched for a normal explanation. Maybe it was a dog. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it was one of the adults walking around the edge of the property. But I knew the adults were by the fire. The only dogs were inside the house. And the shape was too low and too smooth to be a person. I leaned over a little farther. That was when I saw the eyes. They caught the light. Two bright, shining eyes stared back at me from the darkness. Everything inside me dropped at once. I knew exactly what it was. A mountain lion. It was on the other side of the fence, beneath the tree fort, looking up at us. The thing that scared me most was not just that it was there. It was how calm it was. It did not run when it saw us. It did not bolt back into the trees. It did not make a sound. It just watched. Its body blended into the darkness, but I could see enough of it to understand how big it was. The yellowish shape had moved like a cat, but not like any house cat. It was longer, heavier, and built with a kind of strength that made me feel sick, just looking at it. It was close enough that I could make out the shape of its head, close enough that I could see it looking directly at me. I had heard stories about mountain lions. I knew they could stalk quietly. I knew they could move through snow without making much noise. I knew they could attack from places people did not expect. At 12 years old, all I could think was that it was right there, under us, watching us. I do not remember making a decision to shout. It just came out of me. I yelled as loudly as I could, "Run! Run back to the house!" I screamed it at the top of my lungs. I probably used words I was not supposed to use. I did not care. I was terrified. I wanted everyone off that tree fort and inside the house as fast as possible. The other kids did not understand at first. Then, They saw my face. That was enough. I jumped from the fort into the snow. Normally, I would have used the slide like everyone else, but I did not want to waste even a second climbing back down or waiting my turn. I just jumped. The snow was deep enough that it softened the landing, but I still hit hard and stumbled when I landed. Behind me, the others came down the slide, one after another. No one was laughing anymore. We ran. We ran across the snow toward the house as fast as we could. The adults were still by the fire, and I remember shouting something as we got closer, but I do not even know if anyone heard me clearly at first. My heart was pounding so hard that everything felt blurry. I kept expecting to hear something behind us. A growl. More crunching snow. The sound of claws on ice. Anything. But there was nothing. That almost made it worse. We made it inside the house, and everyone started asking what happened. At first, people thought I was joking. They thought I was trying to scare the younger kids. They thought I had seen a shadow and panicked. One adult laughed and asked whether I had seen a monster. Someone else said it was probably just a deer. But I knew what I saw. I told them it was a mountain lion. I said it had been right behind the fence, under the tree fort. I said I saw its eyes. I described the shape and how it moved. I told them the dogs were inside and the adults were far away, so there was nothing else it could have been. Some people took me more seriously once they realized I was actually scared. I was shaking. I was not laughing. I was not trying to make the story bigger. I had been close enough to see those eyes looking up at me. Still, I do not think everyone believed me. The adults may have gone outside to look around. They may have checked the fence line. I do not remember finding tracks, though the snow had already been disturbed by us running back through the yard. Maybe there were tracks, and I did not see them. Maybe the animal had slipped back into the woods before anyone got there. But I never forgot the way it looked. The chain-link fence suddenly felt too weak. When you are a kid, a fence seems like a real barrier. It marks the edge of your yard. It tells you where your space ends and the woods begin. It makes you feel separated from whatever is on the other side. But a mountain lion does not care about a chain-link fence. A mountain lion can climb. It can jump. It can move through places people think are protected. That fence was nothing more than a thin line between us and an animal that had been watching from the darkness. For the rest of the night, I could not stop thinking about it. The bonfire was still going. People kept talking. The party continued, though I stayed closer to the house. The kids did not go back to the tree fort. Nobody wanted to be near that corner of the property anymore. Every time I looked toward the dark edge of the yard, I imagined those eyes again. I imagined the mountain lion standing still beneath the trees. I imagined it moving silently along the fence. I imagined it watching the adults by the fire from the forest while nobody noticed. The strangest part was how little sound it made. Before that, I had always thought dangerous animals would be obvious. I thought you would hear them coming. A big animal should make noise. It should snap branches, crunch through snow loudly, or announce itself somehow. But the mountain lion had been almost silent. The only reason I noticed it at all was because of one crunch in the snow. One small sound. Without that, we could have stayed up in the tree fort laughing and playing while it moved around beneath us. That thought scared me more than anything. After that night, I started noticing the woods differently. The forest behind our house had always been there, but it no longer felt like a background to our property. It felt alive. It felt like a place where things watched from the trees, a place that could be completely quiet and still full of animals. I would look out my bedroom window at night and wonder what was standing out there beyond the edge of the yard. Sometimes we heard the mountain lions again. Those screams would echo through the night, sharp and horrible. They did not sound like something you could easily identify. The first time you hear one, you might think someone is being attacked. You might think somebody is screaming for help deep in the woods. But I knew what they were. I had heard them before. And after seeing that mountain lion beneath the tree fort, the sounds were worse. They were no longer just strange noises outside. They came from an animal I knew had been close enough to look directly at me. I still have recordings of some of those nights on my phone. The sounds are hard to listen to. Even when you know what they are, they can make your skin crawl. The sound rises through the dark and seems to come from everywhere at once. It reminds me of standing in that tree fort. It reminds me of the snow below. It reminds me of how the firelight from the party did not reach the woods. And it reminds me of two shining eyes looking up from the other side of the fence. People often think the scariest stories have to involve ghosts, monsters, or something supernatural. But sometimes the scariest thing is real. Sometimes it is an animal that has been living in the woods the whole time, moving silently where you cannot see it. Sometimes it is strong enough to kill you, quiet enough to get close without being noticed, and patient enough to stand still and watch. I was 12 years old. I was playing in a tree fort, laughing with my friends while adults stood around a bonfire in the distance. Then I heard one crunch in the snow. And when I looked down, a mountain lion was staring back at me. When I was about 10 years old, my grandma had already become one of those people in my life who felt permanent. Some people are loud in a family. Some people are always moving, always talking, always making sure everyone knows they are there. My grandma was not like that. She had a quiet presence, but it was strong. She belonged to the house in a way that certain people do. You could walk into the kitchen and expect to see her there. You could smell tea and know she had probably made herself a cup. You could hear the soft sound of a chair moving against the floor, or the light crinkle of a cracker sleeve opening, and know exactly who it was. Her favorite place was at the kitchen table. She always had a particular seat, and nobody really needed to say it was hers. It was simply understood. That chair belonged to Grandma. Maybe someone else sat there occasionally if she was not around, but it never felt like their seat. When she was home, that was where you could find her. She would sit there with a cup of Lipton tea and a few premium saltine crackers. It was such a simple thing, but that is how childhood memories work. You do not always remember the biggest events. You remember little details that become important later. The yellow and red Lipton tea box, the sound of a spoon stirring against the mug, the faint smell of warm tea rising into the kitchen, the plain saltiness of the crackers, the way she would sit there comfortably, like she had nowhere else to be. I can still picture that seat clearly. The kitchen itself was not anything special. It was a normal kitchen in a second-floor apartment. There was a table, cabinets, counters, and the usual things families had around them. But when she sat there, it felt warmer. The room had a calm feeling. Even if other people were talking in the living room or there was noise in the apartment, her little corner of the kitchen always felt peaceful. She would wear one of her favorite floral dresses around the house sometimes. It was the kind of dress older women wear because it is comfortable, familiar, and practical. It was not fancy. It was not something she put on to go out. It was one of those everyday dresses that became part of how I remembered her. At 10 years old, I probably did not think much about any of that. I did not stand in the kitchen and tell myself to remember her tea, her crackers, her chair, or her floral dress. I did not know that one day those small things would become some of the clearest memories I had of her. They were just normal parts of life. Then she passed away. I do not remember every detail from that time, but I remember the emptiness afterward. When someone has always been part of your home, you notice their absence everywhere. You notice the places they used to sit. You notice the things they used to say. You notice routines that suddenly stop without warning. The kitchen table felt different after she was gone. Her chair was still there. The table was still there. The tea was still in the cupboards. But she was not. At that age, grief is difficult to understand. You know someone is gone, and you know people around you are sad, but part of you still expects them to appear in familiar places. You almost wait for them to walk into a room. You expect to hear their voice from another part of the house. You think you see them in your mind because your brain has spent so long being used to them being there. I remember missing her, though I probably did not know how to put it into words. Life kept going, as it always does. School continued. Friends still came over. Video games still mattered more than almost anything when you were 10. There were afternoons when the sadness felt far away because you were busy being a kid. Then there were random moments when it returned without warning. The experience I remember most happened not too long after she passed away. I had invited some friends over to play Gauntlet Legends on the Nintendo 64. At that age, it was a big deal to have friends coming over for games. We would make plans like it was some major event. We would talk about which characters we were going to use, who got to pick first, who would carry the keys, who would accidentally waste all the food, and who would die at the worst possible time. Gauntlet Legends was one of those games that felt perfect for having friends over. It was exciting, chaotic, and easy for everyone to get pulled into. You could sit around the television yelling at each other, laughing when someone got trapped, blaming one another for losing health, and getting way too serious about something that did not actually matter. I was excited that day. The apartment we lived in was on the second floor. It had two entrances, which always made it feel a little unusual compared to other places I had been. There was one entrance through the living room, which was probably the main way people came in and out. Then there was another entrance in the back room, past the kitchen. The back entrance was useful because one of my friends lived on the first floor. Since they lived below us, it was easier for them to come around through the back rather than walk all the way around to the front. It was not strange for them to use that entrance. In fact, it probably felt more natural for them because it was close to where they lived. I remember being inside, waiting for everyone to show up. The Nintendo 64 was probably already turned on. The television was likely glowing in the living room, with the game music playing quietly or the title screen waiting for us. I was probably thinking about the game, about snacks, about whether everyone would arrive at the same time. Then I heard that my friends were coming through the back entrance. I got excited and ran toward the back of the apartment to let them in. To get there, I had to go through the kitchen. I remember moving quickly. At 10 years old, when your friends are coming over to play video games, you do not walk slowly. You race through the house. Everything feels important. You want to be the first one at the door. You want to make sure nobody is waiting. You want to get everyone inside so the game can start. I was already through the kitchen when, for some reason, I glanced back. I still do not know why I looked. There was nothing that made me stop. No sound, no movement, no voice calling my name. I simply turned my head and looked back toward the kitchen table. For a split second, I saw my grandma sitting in her favorite chair. She was exactly where she always used to be. She was sitting peacefully at the table, facing the way she normally faced. Her posture looked relaxed. Her expression was calm. But more than calm, she looked genuinely happy. That is the part I remember most. She did not look sad. She did not look sick. She did not look frightening. She did not look like some shadowy shape or vague figure that I had to guess at. She looked like my grandma. She was in full color. She was wearing the floral dress she used to wear around the house. I could see it clearly enough to recognize it. The colors were normal. The room around her was normal. Nothing looked distorted. Nothing looked dreamlike. For that one brief moment, it felt as if she had simply been sitting there the whole time. Like she had never left. Like I had run past the kitchen and happened to catch her enjoying a quiet moment with her tea and crackers, just as she always had. But I knew she was gone. That knowledge hit me almost at the same time I saw her. I stopped. I was confused in a way that is hard to explain. At first, my brain did not tell me I was seeing a ghost. It did not even tell me I was seeing something impossible. It was more like my mind could not catch up with what my eyes had just shown me. For one tiny instant, she was there. Then, she was not. I looked back again immediately. The chair was empty. There was no tea, no crackers, no floral dress, no grandma, just the kitchen table, just the quiet room, just the chair where she used to sit. I remember staring at that spot. I probably only stood there for a few seconds, but it felt longer. I was trying to understand whether I had actually seen her or whether I had imagined it. Maybe my eyes had caught a pattern in the room. Maybe the light had hit the chair in a strange way. Maybe I had seen something in the corner of my vision and my mind had filled in the rest. But it had not been a vague impression. It had not been like seeing a shadow and deciding it looked like her. I had seen her face. I had seen her dress. I had seen the peaceful look on her face. I had seen her in the exact seat where she belonged. Then, she was gone. My friends were still waiting by the back entrance, so eventually I had to move again. I probably opened the door and tried to act normal. I probably went back to the living room and played the game like nothing had happened. That is what kids do sometimes when they do not understand something. You move on because everyone else is focused on something ordinary. Your friends are excited about a video game. They are talking loudly. They want to choose characters. They want to know who is playing first. And meanwhile, you are standing there with a memory that does not fit into the rest of the day. I do not remember telling my friends right away. Maybe I did not tell them at all. At 10 years old, I was not sure how to describe it. I did not know whether I should be scared. I did not know if I would be laughed at. I did not know if adults would say I was making it up, or if they would get sad because I had mentioned Grandma. So I kept it in my mind. The game went on. People probably shouted at the television. We probably ate snacks. We probably played for hours. At some point, the strange moment in the kitchen became buried under the normal noise of having friends over. But it did not leave me. Later, when I thought about it, I kept returning to that split second. I would picture myself running through the kitchen. I would picture turning my head. I would picture her in that chair. I would picture the way she looked happy. The fact that she looked peaceful made it different from anything scary. I was not terrified when I saw her. I was confused. Yes, I was startled. But I did not feel like I was in danger. There was nothing threatening about her. She was not staring at me in a strange way. She was not trying to communicate something urgent. She did not look upset, lost, or trapped. She looked content. She looked like she belonged there. It almost felt as though I had seen a memory that had become real for a moment. Maybe that is all it was. Maybe grief can do that. Maybe when you miss someone deeply, your mind can create such a strong picture of them that it feels completely real. Maybe I glanced at the chair, remembered her sitting there, and my brain filled in every detail before I had time to realize it. That would make sense in a way. A child's mind is powerful. Memories are powerful. Grief can make familiar people appear in your thoughts without warning. I had seen her in that chair so many times that maybe my mind simply replayed the image at the exact wrong moment. But the memory did not feel like imagination. It felt like seeing someone. Even now, I can remember the exact feeling of that second. It did not seem faded or distant. It was immediate. It was bright. It was clear. She was there. Then I looked again, and she was gone. As I got older, I thought about it differently. When I was 10, I did not really have a category for what happened. I knew my grandma had died. I knew I had seen her sitting at the kitchen table. I knew that should not have been possible. But I did not know whether to call it a ghost, a vision, a memory, or something else. I only knew I had seen her. As an adult, I still cannot say for sure what happened. I do not know whether people can appear after they are gone. I do not know whether loved ones come back in quiet moments to let us know they are okay. I do not know whether the mind can create something so vivid that it becomes impossible to separate from reality. But I do know that I have never forgotten it. There are childhood memories that become blurry with time. You remember the general feeling, but not the details. You know something happened, but you cannot picture it clearly anymore. This is not like that. I remember the kitchen. I remember running through it. I remember the back entrance waiting beyond it. I remember my friends coming upstairs to play Gauntlet Legends. And I remember turning around and seeing my grandma in her favorite chair. She was wearing her floral dress. She looked happy. She looked peaceful. She looked exactly like herself. The chair was empty when I looked again, but I will never forget that first image. Sometimes I think about how ordinary the moment was. There was no storm outside, no strange noise, no candle flickering, no sudden cold air, no dark shadow crossing the room. It happened in the middle of a normal day when I was excited to play Nintendo 64 with my friends. Maybe that is why it stayed with me. It did not feel like something trying to scare me. It felt like something gentle, like she was still connected to the place where she had spent so much time. Like she was still sitting there, enjoying the small things she loved, a cup of Lipton tea, some premium saltine crackers, and the quiet comfort of her kitchen table. I do not know whether anyone else would believe me. I cannot prove it. There was no picture, no video, no other person standing in the kitchen at that exact moment to see what I saw. It lasted less than a second. But that is enough, because in that 1 second, I saw my grandma again, and she looked happy. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. When I was 8 years old, I was sitting in a car with my 18-year-old cousin during the early evening. I cannot remember the exact time, only that it was somewhere between 5 and 7 o'clock. It was not fully dark yet, but the day was beginning to fade. The sky still had light in it, though the kind of light that makes everything feel quieter. I remember the color of the evening, the spot where we were parked, and even what I was wearing that day. That is one of the reasons the memory has stayed with me for so long. Most childhood memories become blurry after a while. You remember that something happened, but the details begin to disappear. You cannot remember the weather, what you had been doing before, or what clothes you had on. You only remember the general feeling of it. This memory has never faded like that. I remember being 8 years old and sitting in the passenger seat of my cousin's car. The passenger door was wide open. I do not remember why it was open, but I remember that clearly too. I was sitting close to the edge of the seat, with the open door beside me and the outside air coming into the car. My cousin was listening to music. She was older than me, so I probably thought she was cool in the way younger kids often think older cousins are cool. She had the music playing, and she seemed calm, distracted, and lost in her own thoughts. She was not really talking much. She was just sitting there, listening to whatever song was on, kind of zoning out. Nothing seemed strange. It was one of those quiet moments that happen when you are a kid and spending time around an older person. You are not doing anything important. You are just sitting there, waiting for something else to happen. Maybe we were waiting for someone. Maybe she had stopped for a few minutes before driving somewhere. Maybe we had just been hanging out in the car. I do not remember the reason. I only remember the feeling of sitting there with the open door and the music playing. Then, for no reason I could explain, I suddenly felt like I needed to look outside. Not because I heard anything, not because I saw something moving, not because my cousin pointed anything out. I just had an urge to step out of the car and look up at the sky. It was a strange feeling. At 8 years old, I did not think of it as an instinct or a warning. I did not have words for that. I only knew that something inside me told me to look up. So I did. I moved toward the open door and looked into the sky. At that exact moment, I saw something flying above us. It looked like a perfectly shaped plate. That is still the closest description I have for it. It was round and flat. Not oval like a normal airplane seen from below, not long and narrow like a plane wing, not shaped like a helicopter. It did not have visible propellers, wings, or anything hanging beneath it. It looked smooth. It looked balanced. It looked like someone had taken a dinner plate and placed it upside down in the sky above the car. For a second, I did not understand what I was looking at. My brain tried to make it into something normal. Maybe it was an airplane at a strange angle. Maybe it was some kind of helicopter. Maybe it was a bird that looked larger because it was closer than I thought. But it was not moving like a bird. It was not moving like an airplane. And it was much too clear for me to mistake it for something far away. It flew directly over our car. I remember looking straight up and seeing its shape against the evening sky. It seemed close enough that I could tell it was not just a small point of light. It had a solid outline. It was round, smooth, and plate-shaped. Then it flashed lights. The lights were bright. They flashed more than once, strong enough that I thought there was no possible way my cousin could have missed them. The flashes were not soft or distant like stars blinking. They were sharp and sudden. They lit up the object and the space around it in a way that made me feel like it was looking down at us. At the time, I thought it might be taking pictures. That was the only idea my 8-year-old mind could come up with. The object had come directly over the car. It had flashed lights a couple of times. It felt almost like a camera flash, except it was coming from something flying above us. I remember thinking it was taking pictures of our car, or maybe taking pictures of the area around us. I did not know why. I did not know what it was. I only knew that it was there. For a moment, I just stared. The object did not seem to make any sound that I could hear. There was no loud engine, no helicopter blades, no distant plane noise. The music inside the car was still playing, but I do not remember it sounding loud anymore. Everything else seemed to fade into the background because I was focused completely on the thing above us. Then it moved. It did not slowly drift away. It did not turn in a wide circle. It did not fly across the sky like an airplane. It shot away so fast that I barely understood what had happened. 1 second, it was above the car. The next second, it was gone. It vanished into the distance at a speed that made my eyes struggle to follow it. I remember trying to look in the direction it had gone, but there was nothing left to see. No fading light, no trail, no sound, no explanation. It was just gone. I immediately called out to my cousin. I said her name loudly because I was shocked and scared at the same time. I expected her to look up. I expected her to say she had seen it too. I expected her to tell me what it was. But she had not seen anything. At first, she did not believe me. She was still sitting there with the music playing, and she looked at me like I was talking nonsense. I tried to explain what I had seen. I told her something had flown over the car. I told her it looked like a plate. I told her it had flashed bright lights. But she did not react the way I expected. She did not look scared. She did not look toward the sky. She did not ask whether the object was still there. She just did not believe me. That confused me almost as much as the object itself. The lights had been so bright. They had flashed directly above us. I could not understand how she had missed them. Even if she had been listening to music and zoning out, I thought the flashes were too obvious to ignore. But apparently, she saw nothing. I remember trying to explain it again. I probably repeated myself because I was only 8 and did not know how to describe what had just happened. I might have pointed toward the sky. I might have told her it had gone that way. I might have asked why she did not see it. But there was nothing I could do to make her understand. To her, there had been no object, no bright lights, no strange shape above the car, no impossible speed. There was only me, suddenly scared and trying to explain something that she had not seen. After that, I do not remember what we did next. Maybe we went inside. Maybe she drove somewhere. Maybe we stayed parked for a while. I do not remember whether I kept looking at the sky or whether I was too frightened to look up again. I only remember feeling unsettled. I had seen something that did not fit into my understanding of the world, and the one person sitting right beside me had seen absolutely nothing. When you are 8 years old, you expect adults and older people to know what things are. You expect them to explain things. If you see a strange animal, a weird light, or something that scares you, you turn to the older person with you and wait for them to tell you it is okay. But my cousin could not explain it because she had not seen it. That made me feel alone with the memory. That night, I had a strange dream. It was not like an ordinary dream that disappears the moment you wake up. It was vivid. It had a heavy feeling to it, as though I was looking at something enormous and far away, but somehow close enough to matter. In the dream, I saw what looked like a planet. But it did not feel like a normal planet. It looked like a massive ship. The whole thing was huge, so huge that it filled a large part of the darkness around it. It seemed larger than anything I could understand. I remember it being very dark, almost black, but covered in lights. There were thousands of smaller flying objects connected to it. Or at least, that is how it seemed. They moved around the massive structure like tiny lights around something much bigger. Some appeared to be coming from it. Others seemed to be moving toward it. The whole scene felt endless, with darkness stretching beyond the lights in every direction. The enormous ship-like planet had lights all across it. Not warm lights, not the soft lights of a city seen from far away. They were cold, bright points in the darkness. There were so many that I could not count them. The huge object looked alive in a strange way, like a giant machine floating silently in space with thousands of smaller crafts moving around it. I remember feeling very small in the dream. I remember staring at that huge dark object and knowing that it was not something made for people. It was too large, too distant, too unfamiliar. Even though I was dreaming, the feeling was not exactly fear at first. It was more like dread, the kind of dread you feel when you realize you are looking at something you cannot understand. I woke up, disturbed. I do not know whether the dream was connected to what I saw earlier that evening. Maybe my mind had taken the plate-shaped object and turned it into something bigger because I had been scared. Maybe it was simply a child's dream after seeing bright lights in the sky. That would make sense. But the dream stayed with me anyway. The memory of that evening has stayed with me too. I have never told the story to many people. Part of the reason is that I know how it sounds. I know that people hear I saw a flying saucer when I was 8 and immediately assume it was a dream, a plane, a drone, a reflection, or imagination. I understand why people think that. I have tried to think of normal explanations myself. Maybe it was an aircraft I did not recognize. Maybe it was a weather balloon. Maybe it was some kind of light reflecting off a plane. Maybe I saw a helicopter from below and misunderstood the shape because of my age. Maybe I was looking at a bright object moving across the sky, and my memory made it seem closer or more detailed over time. I have thought about all of that, but the object did not look like a normal aircraft. It was too round, too smooth, too close, and it moved too quickly. The lights were the part that made it feel impossible to forget. They were bright enough that I still cannot understand why my cousin did not see them. I was sitting in the passenger seat with the door open. She was right beside me. The object was above our car. If it had been a normal plane, she should have heard it or noticed it. If it had been a helicopter, it should have been loud. If it had been a drone, I do not think drones were common enough at that time for that to be the first thing anyone would assume, and it would still not explain how fast it disappeared. Maybe she really was too distracted to notice. Maybe the music had taken all of her attention. Maybe she was looking in the opposite direction at the exact moment the object passed over us. But I still find that difficult to accept. The event happened so quickly that I never had time to think about taking a picture, calling someone, or trying to get proof. I was 8. I did not have the instinct to document something. I only had the instinct to look up and stare. Then it was gone. Sometimes I wonder whether the memory would bother me less if I had forgotten details. But I have not. I remember where the car was parked. I remember the passenger door being open. I remember my cousin listening to music and zoning out. I remember the evening light. I remember the exact feeling that made me want to look outside. I remember looking up. I remember the plate-shaped object directly above us. I remember the bright flashes, and I remember the way it flew away so quickly that I did not fully understand it until it had already disappeared. The dream that night made the memory worse. For years, I wondered whether it was only a dream because the object had frightened me. I wondered whether my brain had invented the strange planet-shaped ship because I was trying to make sense of what I saw. But the dream felt separate. The object over the car was clear and close. The dream was enormous and distant. The object was a smooth plate with flashes of light. The dream was a dark world-sized ship surrounded by thousands of smaller flying objects. I do not know whether they were connected. I cannot say they were. But I have never been able to completely separate them in my mind. Even now, the memory can make me uncomfortable. Not because I know what happened. It is because I do not. It is because I have no explanation that feels completely right. I was not asleep when I saw the object. I was sitting in a car in the early evening. I was awake. I was looking directly into the sky. I saw it above us, I saw the lights flash. I watched it leave. Then, that night, I dreamed about something far bigger and stranger than anything I had ever thought about before. I have never forgotten that day. I remember my clothes. I remember the place where we were parked. I remember how the air felt when I looked outside. I remember calling my cousin's name and feeling confused when she said she saw nothing. And I remember looking up at the sky and seeing something shaped like a perfect plate hover above our car before it flashed bright lights and disappeared. Maybe it was nothing more than an unusual aircraft. Maybe it was a trick of light. Maybe I was a child who saw something strange and never stopped thinking about it. But whatever it was, it changed the way I looked at the sky. Because after that day, I understood that sometimes you can look up for only a few seconds and see something you may never be able to explain. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, my brother and I saw something we still cannot explain. It happened during the summer, when school was out and the days felt endless. We had spent the day visiting our grandparents, who lived about 3 hours away from us. It had been a normal family visit. We had probably eaten too much food, listened to adults talk for hours, played around the house, and eventually reached that point late in the evening when everyone was tired enough to leave. By the time we got back into the van for the drive home, it was already dark. I remember being sleepy, but not asleep. There is a certain kind of tiredness children get after a long day with family. You are worn out, but you still do not want to sleep because you do not want to miss anything. The van felt warm and familiar. My parents were in the front. My brother and I were in the back. The road noise was steady, and the headlights moved across the pavement in a quiet rhythm. We had been driving for maybe half an hour. The road took us through open farmland. There were no city lights, no busy intersections, no large buildings, and not much traffic. Just long, dark roads cutting between fields. Every now and then, we would pass a farmhouse with 1 or 2 windows glowing in the distance, or a cluster of trees that looked like a solid black wall beside the road. But above us, the sky was clear. It was one of those nights where you could see more stars than usual because there was nothing around to block them out. The darkness in the fields made the sky feel enormous. I was lying down across the back seat area, with my head resting on the wheel hump near the side of the van. From there, I could look up through the window and watch the stars pass slowly overhead. I remember being completely absorbed in them. As a child, I did not know much about astronomy. I could not name constellations or tell the difference between a planet and a star. I only knew that the sky looked beautiful. There were so many lights above us that it seemed impossible they could all be so far away. The van kept moving through the farmland. The road hummed beneath us. My parents spoke quietly in the front, though I could not clearly hear what they were saying. My brother was nearby. Everything felt calm and ordinary. Then I noticed something in the sky. At first, I thought it was a star, but it was too close. It was also moving with us. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. The object was above the van and slightly to the left, outside the window on my side. It was not high in the sky like a plane or a satellite. It seemed low enough that I could make out its shape. It was pacing us. That is the only way I can describe it. No matter how the van moved, it stayed in nearly the same place, relative to us. It remained above and to the left, as though it were following our speed exactly. It did not fall behind us. It did not drift forward. It did not cross the sky in a straight line. It simply held its position. I remember feeling confused before I felt scared. At first, I thought maybe it was an airplane flying in the same direction as us. But planes do not remain fixed in the same spot above a moving vehicle for that long. Even if one is flying parallel to a road, it changes position. It gets closer or farther away. It moves across the sky. This thing did not. It stayed with us. I stared at it harder. It looked circular at first. It was like a glowing round object hanging above the road, not huge, but close enough that it was impossible to ignore. I remember thinking it looked smooth and bright, almost like a light shining through fog, except the sky was clear. There were no clouds around it. There was nothing blocking my view. Then the shape changed. It did not rotate in the normal way an airplane or helicopter might look different from another angle. It changed. The round shape stretched and sharpened into a triangle. I remember watching it happen and feeling my whole body tense up. The object was not simply turning. Its outline seemed to shift fluidly, as if it did not have one fixed form. The triangle held for a moment, clear enough that I could see the three sides. Then it changed again. The triangle became a rectangle. Then the rectangle stretched longer, becoming an oval. Then it pulled back into something rounder. It kept changing shape quickly and smoothly. There were no sharp mechanical movements. Nothing opened or folded. Nothing looked like wings moving. It was more like watching a drop of water floating in zero gravity, expanding and reshaping itself without any visible force. The object looked alive in a way I cannot properly explain. Not alive like an animal, not alive like a person, but alive in the sense that it seemed to respond to itself. Its shape flowed from one form to another, as though the object had no solid outer surface. It would become circular, then triangular, then long and oval, then rectangular, and every change happened without a clear beginning or end. I was so shocked that I poked my brother. At first, I did not say anything. I just wanted to make sure I was not the only one seeing it. I pointed toward the window and tried to get his attention. He looked. Then he froze too. That was the moment I knew it was not something I had imagined. My brother saw it. We both watched it through the window while the van continued down the dark country road. The object kept pace with us. It stayed no more than around 100 feet away, maybe even closer. I was a child, so I cannot be completely certain about distance, but it did not feel far away. It felt close enough that we could see its outline changing. Close enough that the colors were bright and clear. Because the colors were another impossible part of it. The object glowed from within. It did not have one light on the side like a plane. It did not have blinking red, white, or green navigation lights. The entire thing seemed to give off light. The glow came from inside its shape, and as the shape changed, the color changed too. It moved through every color I could think of. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, colors I did not have words for when I was that age. But the changes were not sudden like flashing Christmas lights. It did not jump from red to blue or from green to yellow. The colors faded into each other smoothly, one shade flowing into the next. It was like watching neon light melt and shift across the object. Sometimes it would glow blue, then soften into purple. Then purple would fade into pink. Then pink would become red. Then red would become orange. And all the while, the object was still changing shape. The pulsing seemed connected to the shape changes. Whenever the light grew brighter, the object would stretch or shift. When the brightness softened, the shape would settle into another form. It seemed almost rhythmic, like it was breathing. The object would pulse with color and light, then become a triangle. It would pulse again and stretch into a rectangle. Another pulse, then an oval. It was beautiful. That is one of the strangest things to admit. At first, it did not feel threatening. It was terrifying because it made no sense, but it was also mesmerizing. My brother and I were staring at this unbelievable display outside the window, unable to look away. It was like watching a silent light show in the middle of nowhere. Neither of us knew what to say. We were kids. We did not have the language to describe something so strange. I remember making small noises, maybe whispering to my brother, maybe asking him if he could see it. I remember us trying to get our parents' attention. That part is one of the things that has bothered us most ever since. We tried to call to them. We said something. We may have said Mom or Dad or look outside. I cannot remember the exact words now, but I remember trying to get them to turn around. We both wanted them to see it. We wanted an adult to explain what it was. We wanted somebody in the front seat to look back and tell us it was a plane, a weather balloon, a helicopter, or something normal. But there was no response. My parents kept driving. They did not turn around. They did not ask what we were talking about. They did not even react like they had heard us. At first, I thought maybe the sound of the van had covered our voices. Maybe they were talking to each other and did not notice. So we tried again. Still nothing. They just kept looking ahead at the road. The van moved through the dark farmland, and the object remained outside the window, changing color and shape. My brother and I were getting more desperate to make them notice. We may have raised our voices. We may have leaned forward. I remember the feeling of being frustrated and confused because it felt like we were right there, only a few feet behind them, but somehow they could not hear us. It was not as if they were asleep. They were driving. They were awake, but they acted completely oblivious. I remember looking between the object and the backs of my parents' heads. I remember wondering why they would not answer. That was when the experience began to feel frightening. The object was already strange enough. It was too close, too colorful, too fluid, and moving in ways I had never seen before. But the silence from the front seat made the entire situation feel wrong. My brother and I could see it. We could see each other seeing it. But our parents seemed cut off from us somehow. The object continued pacing the van. We watched it for what felt like a long time. I do not know how long it really was. Maybe it was only a few minutes. Maybe it was much longer. When you are a child and something shocking happens, time becomes difficult to judge. A few seconds can feel endless. 10 minutes can disappear completely. I remember staring at the colors and shapes, but I do not remember the object changing direction or beginning to leave. I do not remember the encounter ending. That is the part that still gives me chills. One moment, my brother and I were looking at the object outside the window. The next moment, we were pulling into our driveway. The trip home should have taken another 2.5 hours, and somehow that entire period is missing. There is no memory of the drive after the object, no memory of the road changing, no memory of stopping for gas, no memory of passing through towns, no memory of being tired, no memory of eventually falling asleep, no memory of the object flying away. There is just a blank space. Then we were home. I remember the van slowing down as we pulled into the driveway. I remember recognizing our house. I remember the normal feeling of arriving after a long trip. But it was like the time between seeing that object and getting home had been cut out of my memory. My brother has the same gap. We have talked about it many times over the years. We both remember lying in the back of the van. We both remember the clear summer night. We both remember the farmland. We both remember the object pacing the van above and to the left. We both remember it changing shape. We both remember the colors moving across it. We both remember trying to get our parents' attention, and we both remember suddenly being in the driveway. Neither of us remembers what happened in between. That is not normal childhood forgetfulness. People forget parts of long car rides, especially when they are young. You fall asleep. You stare out the window. You get bored. You do not remember every road or every song on the radio, but we do not remember the moment it ended. We do not remember the object leaving. We do not remember becoming tired enough to sleep. We do not remember being woken up when we arrived. We only remember that 1 minute we were watching something impossible, and the next minute we were home. Years later, we asked our parents about it. We told them what we remembered. We described the object. We asked whether they remembered us calling to them from the back seat. We asked whether there had been anything strange on the road that night. We asked whether we had fallen asleep unusually fast or acted odd when we got home. They did not remember anything, not the object, not us trying to get their attention, not our voices in the back seat, not anything unusual about the drive. To them, it had been a normal trip home from my grandparents' house. They remembered driving. They remembered the visit. They remembered getting home. But they had no memory of the strange lights, the changing shapes, or us trying to make them look. That made it harder to explain. At first, I wondered whether my brother and I had both dreamed it. Maybe we fell asleep in the van at the same time and had a similar dream. Maybe the lights outside, the stars, and the movement of the road turned into something unusual in our minds. Maybe we were half asleep and influenced each other by talking. But the memory feels too shared. My brother remembers details that I remember. He remembers the object changing from a circle into a triangle. He remembers the colors flowing through it. He remembers how it stayed in the same position beside the van. He remembers trying to get our parents' attention. We did not create the story together later. We have each remembered it independently. Sometimes one of us mentions a detail, and the other immediately knows what they mean, because we saw the same thing. I have also tried to think of normal explanations. Could it have been a plane? I do not think so. A plane cannot keep a fixed position above a moving van for that long. It cannot morph through different shapes. It cannot silently glow every color in smooth waves. Could it have been a helicopter? Again, no. A helicopter would have made noise. It would have had a recognizable shape. It would not stretch into an oval or become a rectangle. Could it have been a drone? Maybe, in a modern sense, people might suggest that. But the thing we saw was much too large and too close, and it was changing in ways that did not look mechanical. It did not have propellers. It did not move like anything controlled by normal technology. Could it have been a reflection in the window? That does not explain why both of us saw it outside, why it stayed fixed relative to the van, or why it appeared to change shape and color against the open night sky. Could it have been a trick of light from another car? There were no cars close enough for that. We were on open farmland, and the object was above us, not beside or behind us. The more we tried to explain it, the less any normal answer fit. I cannot say what it was. I do not know whether it was extraterrestrial. I do not know whether it was some kind of rare atmospheric event. I do not know whether it was a military craft, a strange natural phenomenon, or something neither of us understands. But I know it did not behave like anything ordinary. It followed our van. It changed shape. It changed color. It pulsed like it was connected to some rhythm we could not hear. And then there was missing time. That part has stayed with me more than the lights themselves. The object was amazing, frightening, and beautiful all at once. But at least I can remember seeing it. The missing time is different. It is a blank area, in the middle of a real night. There should be memories there. There should be 2.5 hours of road, darkness, conversation, sleep, or arriving home. Instead, there is nothing. Sometimes, I wonder whether the object was there for only a moment and we simply fell asleep afterward. Maybe the missing time is normal. Maybe children in the back of a van after a long day at their grandparents' house would naturally fall asleep. Maybe our parents did not hear us because they were focused on driving and the object was farther away than we thought. Maybe that is all it was. But then I remember how clear it looked. I remember its color. I remember the triangle. I remember the rectangle. I remember the oval shape stretching and folding like a glowing liquid object in the sky. And I remember my brother looking at it too. We still talk about it to this day because neither of us has ever found a way to make sense of it. We are older now. We know memory can be unreliable. We know children can misunderstand things. We know the brain can fill in gaps and turn strange experiences into bigger stories over time. But this does not feel like that. It feels like one of the few memories from childhood that never faded. A clear night. Open farmland. A van moving through darkness. 2 children in the back seat looking out the window. A glowing object keeping pace beside them. And then, somehow, the rest of the drive disappearing. When I moved in with my aunt at 16, it was because my dad had been abusing me. I thought getting out of his house would finally give me a chance to breathe. I thought being somewhere else, with family, would mean safety. I knew it would take time to recover from what had happened with my dad, but I believed the worst part of my life was behind me. Instead, everything became worse within the first week. At first, it was small things that made me uncomfortable. Then it turned into a life where I was always watching the walls, always listening for footsteps, always waiting for the next signal that meant I had done something wrong. My aunt had put a light bulb in the basement room where I slept. A cable ran from the bulb all the way upstairs to her room. Whenever she wanted me to come upstairs, she would blink the light. That was my signal. It did not matter what I was doing. It did not matter whether I was in the middle of homework, writing in my diary, getting dressed, eating, or trying to rest. The second the light blinked, I had to run upstairs. I was expected to get there immediately, not a minute later, not after I finished a sentence, not after I put on a shirt. I had maybe 10 seconds before I would be in trouble. If I did not appear upstairs fast enough, there would be consequences. Sometimes she took away my internet or my laptop for hours or days. Sometimes she would force me to eat until I felt sick. Sometimes she would make me sit through what she called family time. Family time was not warm or normal. It was never about spending time together. It meant I had to sit in the living room, completely still, while my aunt and uncle talked down to me. I was not allowed to read. I was not allowed to write. I was not allowed to look at my phone, draw, listen to music, or do anything except sit there and stare ahead. They would tell me how disrespectful I was. They would tell me how selfish I was. They would say things that were meant to make me feel worthless. Sometimes they would speak calmly, which was worse somehow, because it made it sound like they believed every cruel thing they said. The light could blink every half hour. Sometimes it felt even more often than that. I stopped being able to focus on anything. I would start a task and already feel nervous because I knew I might have to drop it at any second. I could not relax. I could not settle into a book, a drawing, a song, or even a simple thought. Even now, lights can make me uneasy. A flickering bulb, a light flashing from another room, a notification glowing in the dark. My body still reacts before my mind does. For a second, I am 16 again, in that basement, waiting to be summoned. I did not eat meat for ethical reasons. I never made a big speech about it. I never demanded special meals or tried to make anyone else change what they ate. I told my aunt that she did not need to buy extra food for me. I said I would be fine eating vegetables, rice, pasta, or whatever was already there. She took it personally. After that, she started putting bacon pieces and eggs into vegetables that had never needed them before. She would watch me when I ate. She acted as if I had insulted her just by not wanting meat. It was like every choice I made was somehow about her. Nothing was allowed to belong only to me. Not my food, not my clothes, not my opinions, not my body, not even my time. If I disagreed with her or my uncle, they treated it like an attack. One time, I came home from school and they asked what I had learned that day. I had a philosophy class, and I started explaining something we had talked about. I said, so first, we assume that humans, like all animals, I did not even get to finish. My aunt immediately started yelling, asking if I had just called them animals. My uncle joined in. They said I had no respect. They said I was lying. My aunt started quoting religious lines at me, repeating that I should not lie, even though I had not lied about anything. That argument went on for hours. I kept trying to explain what I meant. I tried to say that I was repeating an idea from class. I tried to explain that humans are animals in the biological sense. But the more I explained, the angrier they became. They did not want an explanation. They wanted me to admit that I was wrong. Sometimes, when I had a different opinion, my aunt would grab my arms and bend them so I could not move away. Then she would hold a mirror close to my face and make me look at myself. She would force me to repeat things like, I am a liar. I am wrong. My aunt is right, and I am a liar. I had to say it again and again until she decided I sounded sorry enough. There was no way to win. If I argued, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was rude. If I cried, I was manipulative. If I looked away, I was avoiding responsibility. If I tried to explain myself, I was lying. After a while, I started doubting my own thoughts. I would have an opinion and immediately wonder whether it was wrong. I would remember something that had happened and question whether I had imagined it. I started feeling like I was always one sentence away from punishment. My bedroom door had been broken because my aunt kicked it in during an argument. After that, I asked whether it could be repaired. I thought that was a normal thing to ask. The door did not close properly, and I had no privacy at all. But she said no. She told me that if the door worked, I would lock it. She said she needed to be able to come in whenever she wanted. The door was always left cracked open. At night, I could see the line of light from the hallway. I could hear every movement in the house. I never knew when she might appear in the doorway. I asked if I could at least have a magnet so the door could click shut. I did not ask for a lock. I did not ask to keep her out. I only wanted it close enough that I could feel like I had a room of my own. After weeks of asking, she finally gave me one. Even then, it did not make me feel safe. It only made the door stay in place. It did not stop her from opening it. It did not stop her from checking on me. It did not stop her from reminding me that there was nowhere in that house where I could truly be alone. I was very thin at that age, and I hated people seeing my body. I did not feel comfortable in anything revealing. I wore tights under skirts. I wore shirts that covered my chest and neck. I wore skirts low so they covered more of my legs. None of it was meant to be about anyone else. I was just trying to feel less exposed. But my aunt decided that the way I dressed was an insult to her. She said I was trying to make her feel bad about her body. She accused me of acting like I thought I was better than her. She said covering myself up was a way of body shaming her. Sometimes she forced me to take clothes off in the hallway where there were windows facing the street. I was told I was not allowed to wear tights. She made fun of the way I pulled my skirts down to cover my legs. She acted like every attempt I made to hide myself was some kind of cruel statement against her. One morning, I was getting ready for school in a blouse. It was wrinkled, and my aunt said she wanted to iron it quickly. She told me to take it off. I said I would go to my room and put on a shirt while she ironed it. She would not allow that. She made me stand in the hallway in only my bra while she dealt with the blouse. I was terrified that someone outside could see through the glass door or the windows. I tried to cover myself with my arms and stand close to a doorway where I could not be seen. When she noticed, she became angry. She forced my hands down and made me stand where I was more exposed. She said I was doing it to make her feel bad. She said I was being ignorant and cruel. I remember feeling completely humiliated, but I also remember feeling confused. I could not understand how trying to cover myself had become something she could punish me for. The worst part was that I slowly started believing I might be the problem. She told me so often that I was selfish, dishonest, ungrateful, dramatic, and disrespectful that I began to wonder whether she was right. I had already come from my father's abuse. I already had a broken idea of what love and family were supposed to look like. So when my aunt told me that I was the cause of everything, part of me believed her. I was eating very little at the time, but I was not anorexic. I was just stressed, anxious, and constantly afraid. Food did not feel normal anymore. Nothing did. My aunt started forcing me to eat large amounts of food. She would cook too much and make me keep eating even when I was full and uncomfortable. Sometimes I felt like I was going to be sick, but she would not let me stop. Food became another thing she could control. Over that year, I gained weight. It was not a huge amount, but it changed the way I saw myself. I felt trapped in my own body. I had spent so much time trying to hide because I felt too thin, and then I started feeling ashamed in a different way. I tried to make myself sick because I did not know what else to do. When that did not work, I started drinking. Alcohol became an escape for me. I did not drink because I wanted to have fun. I drank because I wanted my thoughts to stop. I drank because I wanted to feel numb. I drank because it was one of the only things that made me feel like I could take control of something, even if it was destroying me. I ended up in the hospital twice because of alcohol poisoning while I lived there. I also started hurting myself in secret. I did not want anyone to see, so I hid it in places that were easier to cover. It was not about attention. It was not about trying to make anyone feel sorry for me. I wanted pain because pain was simple. It was easier to understand than fear. It was easier to deal with than being told every day that I was wrong for existing the way I did. Before living with my aunt, I had hobbies. I had things that made me feel like myself. I read several books every week. I played guitar and piano. I kept a diary carefully. I taught myself bits of programming because I was curious. I drew constantly. I wanted to go to art school. I had dreams. I had interests. I had a future in my head. But the light in the basement broke all of that apart. Every time I tried to do something I loved, I was waiting for the next blink. I could not get lost in a book because I might be called upstairs. I could not practice music because I might be interrupted. I could not draw for long. I could not write honestly in my diary because I was afraid someone would find it. I could not focus long enough to learn anything new. Little by little, I gave everything up. Eventually, I would just sit on my laptop for hours without really doing anything. I would scroll through things and stare at the screen because it was easier than beginning something that might be taken away from me. I was not enjoying myself. I was just waiting. I was always waiting. I ran away twice. Both times, I ended up staying around punks in occupied spaces. It was not safe. It was not comfortable. It was not a good situation by any normal standard. But it still felt better than being in that house. At least there, I was not waiting for a light to blink. At least there, nobody was forcing me to look in a mirror and call myself a liar. At least there, I could sit quietly without being punished for it. There were moments when I became scared of myself. I was full of anger that had nowhere to go. I remember standing behind my aunt, holding a knife, feeling like I was seconds away from doing something terrible. I never did. She turned around, and I stopped. But it frightened me how close I had come. I did not want to hurt anyone. I did not want to become violent. I was just exhausted, trapped, and desperate for the fear to end. I asked to see a therapist. I thought that maybe a therapist would listen. Maybe someone outside the family would tell me whether I was really as horrible as they said. Maybe someone would help me explain what was happening. My aunt refused. She said, "We are not sick." By we, she meant the family. She believed that therapy was for strange people, broken people, people who should be ashamed. She did not want anyone outside the house hearing what was happening inside it. She also took away my dancing. Before moving in with her, dancing had been a huge part of my life. I had been in a dance group for 4 years. It was where I had friends. It was where I felt capable. It was where I felt normal. My aunt said family had to come first. She told me that if I behaved well enough, maybe I could join a dance group again one day. But there was always another reason why I could not go. She tracked my school bus. She checked whether I came home on time. My school friends would hang out after school, but I was never allowed to stay with them. I was not allowed to have a life that did not include her. My friends used to meet at a bar every Friday night. I lived in a village, so I had to ask my aunt and uncle to drive me there. They did. Like most teenagers, I would ask them to drop me off a little farther down the road. I did not want my friends seeing me get out of the car with my aunt and uncle. It was embarrassing in the normal way teenagers get embarrassed by family. After a few weeks, my uncle grabbed me by the shoulders. He got close to my face and told me he knew I did not really have friends. He said he knew I was just a lonely, ugly girl sitting by myself on a park bench all night, pretending I had somewhere to be. I remember how cold I felt after he said it. It was like he wanted me to believe that no one would want me. Like he wanted me to think I had nobody except them. I moved out when I was 18. For 2 years, I told people what was happening. I told my parents. I told teachers. I tried to explain the light, the punishments, the humiliation, the way I had no privacy, the way I was controlled. Nobody believed me. My aunt told everyone I was just a difficult teenager. She said I was angry, dramatic, rebellious, and impossible to handle. And because she was older, because she sounded calm when she spoke, because she was family, people believed her. I spent years thinking it was not abuse. I told myself other people had it worse. I told myself I was exaggerating. I told myself that maybe I really had been a terrible teenager. I told myself that because nobody believed me, maybe there was nothing real to believe. It was not until I spoke to a therapist later that someone finally told me that what happened was abuse. That word felt strange at first. It felt too serious. It felt like something I had not earned the right to say. But the more I understood what had happened, the more I realized how much of myself I had lost in those 2 years. My dad's abuse had already taken so much from me. Living with my aunt took what was left. It took my hobbies. It took my confidence. It took my sense of safety. It took the parts of me that used to be curious and creative and hopeful. It made me afraid of lights. It made me afraid of speaking. It made me believe I had to earn the right to exist without being punished. For a long time, I thought nobody would care if I said any of this out loud. Maybe people would still say it was not that bad. Maybe they would say I should be grateful that I had a place to live. Maybe they would say I was just a teenager who did not like rules. But I know now that it was real. I know now that I was not lying. And I know that surviving something does not mean it was not abuse. It was me, my dad, my sister, my dad's friend, and my dad's friend's dog. We had planned to go camping somewhere far away from any normal campsite. There were no marked spaces, no bathrooms, no little shop nearby, and no other tents lined up around us. To reach the place where we were staying, we had to take a boat across, and then travel down a river until we reached a stretch of old woods. It was proper camping, the kind where you had to bring everything you needed with you, the kind where, once you got there, there was nothing around except water, trees, mud, bugs, and the sounds of the forest. I was young at the time, though I do not remember my exact age. I only remember how exciting it felt at first. The boat ride alone made it feel like we were going somewhere secret. We passed through the river with trees hanging over the water on both sides. The woods looked thick and old, like they had been there forever. When we finally reached the place where we were going to camp, there was a small clearing near the edge of the woods. It was close enough to the river that we could see the water through the trees. The ground was uneven, with patches of dirt, roots, and wet grass. The forest behind the clearing was dark even in the daytime because the trees were so close together. My dad and his friends started setting up camp. They unloaded bags, tents, food, and everything else from the boat. The dog kept running around excitedly, sniffing the ground, disappearing behind trees, and then coming back again. My sister and I got bored quickly. We had been sitting around while the adults got everything ready, and once the tents were mostly set up, we decided to play hide and seek. It seemed like the perfect place for it. There were trees everywhere. There were bushes, fallen branches, and so many places to hide that it felt like we could play for hours. At first, it was normal. My sister went into the woods to hide, and I counted near the camp. I remember trying to make the counting loud enough that she could hear me, but not too loud because I did not want to make it too easy for her. When I finished, I started looking. I called her name once or twice. I walked around the edge of the clearing, checking behind trees and bushes. Then, I started moving farther into the woods. It only took around 30 seconds for everything to change. I was running through the trees, looking left and right, trying to spot my sister. The ground was rough beneath my feet. There were roots sticking out of the dirt, and wet leaves scattered everywhere. I had to keep turning around trees and stepping over branches. Then, as I turned, I saw someone standing there. I only saw him for half a second, maybe even less. But I saw him. He was a medium-sized man, probably around 50 years old. He had long gray hair that looked messy and unwashed, like it had not been brushed in a long time. He was standing in the woods, completely still. The thing I noticed most was his yellow raincoat. It stood out so sharply against the trees that it almost did not look real. Everything around him was dark green, brown, and gray. The forest was damp and shadowy, but his coat was bright yellow. It was the kind of color you would notice immediately. I had been running, and I was turning at the time, so I only caught a glimpse. But the moment I saw him, something inside me changed. My heart dropped and then started racing so hard that I could feel it deep in my body. For a second, I thought maybe it was my dad. Then I knew it was not. My dad was back at the camp. His friend was there, too. I had just seen them. And even if one of them had come into the woods, neither of them looked like that man. I stopped. I turned back right away. But he was gone. There was nobody there. No sound of someone walking away. No branches moving. No footsteps through the leaves. No voice. No sign of anyone. Just trees. For a moment, I stood there trying to make sense of it. I remember staring at the exact place where I had seen him. I kept expecting him to step out from behind a tree or walk toward me. I thought maybe I had looked away at the wrong moment and he had moved, but there was nowhere he could have gone that fast. The woods were thick. There were trees everywhere. The ground was uneven and covered in leaves. If someone had walked away, I should have heard something. I knew I had seen him. The yellow raincoat made that impossible to forget. I called out, "Hello?" I waited. Nothing answered. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello?" Still nothing. I was scared, but I also knew my dad was nearby. The camp was not far away. I knew that if I screamed or called for help, my dad, his friend, and the dog would come running. That made me feel a little safer, but not enough. I kept calling out because I thought maybe the man was lost. Maybe he had not heard me at first. Maybe he was standing there because he needed help. But the silence felt wrong. It was not normal forest silence. There were still birds somewhere farther away. There was still the sound of the river in the distance. But around the place where I had seen him, it felt like everything had gone still. I did not want to go any farther into the woods. I suddenly did not care about hide and seek anymore. I called for my sister instead. I yelled her name, probably louder than I needed to. I remember my voice sounding strange. I was trying to sound normal, but I could hear the fear in it. She came back almost straight away. I remember feeling relieved when I saw her come through the trees. I told her that there was a man in the woods. I told her I had seen someone standing there in a yellow raincoat. I do not remember exactly what she said. I think she probably thought I was joking at first. But I was not joking. I was scared enough that I did not even want to keep playing. We went back to the camp. When we got there, I told everyone what I had seen. I told my dad. I told his friend. I described the man as best as I could. I said he had long gray hair. I said he looked around 50. I said he was wearing a yellow raincoat. I told them exactly where I had seen him. Nobody believed me. I do not remember them being cruel about it. I think they probably just assumed I had seen a tree trunk, a shadow, or maybe someone who had been walking nearby and then gone away. They might have thought I had imagined it because I was playing in the woods. But I knew what I saw. I had not mistaken the yellow coat for anything else. It was too bright, too clear. The adults did not seem worried. They continued setting things up. The dog was still wandering around, sniffing the grass and dirt near the camp. The daylight was starting to fade, and eventually we all settled in for the night. At the time, I tried to tell myself I had probably seen someone passing through. Maybe there was another camper nearby. Maybe he was fishing by the river. Maybe he had seen us and did not want to come close. Maybe he had simply walked away before I turned back. But none of those explanations felt right. There were no other campsites around us. There were no roads nearby. We had reached the place by boat. The idea of a stranger standing alone in those woods was already strange. But the way he disappeared was what stayed with me. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. The tents were set up in the clearing near the edge of the woods. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds outside. The river made a low sound in the distance. Every now and then, I could hear the dog moving around or shaking itself. I could hear quiet voices from the adults before they went to sleep. But every time I heard a branch snap, I thought about the man in the yellow raincoat. Every time I heard leaves moving, I imagined someone standing just beyond the trees. I kept thinking he might come back. I do not know what time it was when the helicopter appeared, but I remember it being around 3 in the morning. I had been half asleep when the sound started. At first, it was distant, a low noise somewhere far away. Then, it became louder and louder, until it was impossible to ignore. The helicopter came down over the trees. It was flying low enough that the sound filled the entire clearing. The noise was huge. It felt like the air itself was shaking. I remember opening my eyes and seeing light move across the walls of the tent. Then the helicopter was directly above our camp. A huge white spotlight came down from it and pointed straight into the clearing. The light was so bright that it felt like daytime for a few seconds. It moved over the tents, over the grass, over the trees, over the riverbank. The whole camp was lit up in a cold white beam. Every shadow disappeared under it. I remember feeling frozen in my sleeping bag. I was tired, confused, and scared. Part of me wanted to get up and look outside, but another part of me did not want to see anything. My dad and his friend got out to see what was happening. I could hear them moving around outside. I remember hearing the dog react too, though I do not remember whether it barked or just became restless. The helicopter stayed above us for what felt like a long time, but it was probably only around 5 minutes. The light kept scanning the area. It passed across the edge of the woods again and again. I remember wondering if they were looking for the man I had seen. Nobody told me much at the time. I was young, and everyone was tired. I stayed in my sleeping bag and tried to pretend it was nothing. But I could not stop thinking about the yellow raincoat. Eventually, the helicopter left. The sound slowly faded as it moved away over the river and trees. The clearing went dark again. The only light left was from the moon and whatever small lamps or torches we had near the tents. After that, I do not remember falling asleep easily. I remember lying there, listening. I kept waiting to hear footsteps outside. I kept thinking about that man standing in the woods. I wondered whether he had seen me. I wondered why he had not said anything. I wondered whether he had been watching our camp before I saw him. The next morning, nobody seemed to want to stay much longer. We packed everything up and got ready to leave. The adults took down the tents. Bags were loaded back into the boat. The dog ran around the clearing one last time. I remember looking toward the woods while we were leaving, trying to see if I could spot anything yellow between the trees. I did not see him again. We got into the boat and went back down the river toward the cars. The ride back felt different from the ride there. When we had arrived, the woods had seemed exciting. They had seemed like part of an adventure. On the way back, I could not stop looking at the tree line. I kept thinking about how easy it would be for someone to stand there and watch us without being seen. When we finally got back to the cars, we found something strange. There was a small card on my dad's friend's car. It was around the size of a business card. The background was light purple with flowers on it. It looked almost delicate, like something that would be given at a funeral or left beside flowers. There was a poem about death on it. At the bottom it said, R.I.P. I remember how strange that felt. We had been deep in the woods, reachable by boat, far away from normal campsites. Then we returned to the cars and found a card about death placed on one of them. I do not know who put it there. Maybe it had been there before we left and nobody noticed. Maybe someone had put it there while we were gone. Maybe it was completely unrelated to us. But after what happened in the woods, it did not feel unrelated. It felt like a message. Not a clear message. Not something that explained anything. Just something strange enough to make the whole trip feel wrong. A few days later, my dad's friend saw something in the newspaper. A man had gone missing in the same area where we had been camping by the river. From what I remember, people believed he may have drowned or disappeared near the water around the time we had been there. I do not know the man's name. I do not know whether he was ever found. I do not know whether he really was the person I saw, but I have always believed he was. I remember the yellow raincoat too clearly. I remember the long gray hair. I remember how still he was standing in the woods, and I remember how he was gone when I turned back. Maybe he was a lost man trying to find his way out. Maybe he had been hurt. Maybe he had been walking near the river and somehow ended up close to our camp. Maybe the helicopter was searching for him that same night. Or maybe he had already gone missing by the time I saw him. Maybe what I saw was not someone who was supposed to be there at all. Nobody really believed me then, and I do not think they fully believe me now. They think I saw something else. They think I got scared in the woods and filled in the rest. They think the helicopter, the card, and the newspaper story made the memory feel bigger over time. But I know what I saw. I saw a man in a yellow raincoat standing alone in the trees. And when I turned back, he was gone. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.